The cold, metallic tang of the hospital air was a constant reminder. Even outside, that life hung by the thinnest thread. Sukai slumped onto the hard plastic bench by the emergency entrance, the fluorescent glow of the waiting room seeping under the double doors like a sickly yellow spill. Hours stretched and congealed, marked only by the hushed squeak of gurneys and the muted urgency of unseen voices. His phone had long since died, a dead weight in his pocket. Only the unwavering, agonizing hope for her sustained him. Her name, a silent prayer, echoed in the hollow cavern of his chest. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, pulling him down. He closed his eyes, intending only a moment of rest, but the moment stretched, unraveling the tight knot of reality. The hospital doors, once solid, dissolved into a shimmering curtain of liquid moonlight. He pushed through effortlessly, finding himself not in a sterile hallway, but on a precipice overlooking a vast, iridescent sea. The waves weren't water, but undulating layers of pure, raw emotion, shimmering emeralds of joy, deep indigos of sorrow, burning reds of anger, all swirling in a chaotic, beautiful symphony. He knew, with an instinct more profound than thought, that this was her emotional landscape, the very essence of her being, now under siege. A gigantic, shadowy fissure tore open in the center of the emotional ocean, a jagged wound that pulsed with a draining, gray light. He felt a sharp tug, a desperate plea for help. This was the illness, not a physical ailment, but a metaphysical tear, attempting to siphon away her very vibrancy. He had to reach her. He launched himself forward, not falling, but soaring on currents of hope, his fingers trailing through the emotional waves. The joy warmed him, the sorrow chilled, but the anger, a searing red, propelled him onward. The fissure pulsed, threatening to swallow the entire sea. Within its depths, he could just make out a tiny, flickering light, her consciousness fighting to stay anchored. He saw impossible things, schools of fish made of crystallized laughter swimming through currents of quiet determination, mountains sculpted from forgotten dreams, their peaks piercing a sky of pure, unadulterated yearning. He passed through a forest where trees whispered forgotten lullabies, their leaves shimmering with the glow of unexpressed kindness. This was the tapestry of her soul, magnificent and imperiled. A sudden, jarring impact brought him back to reality. A janitor, pushing a buffer, had nudged his foot. The fluorescent light, the hard bench, the persistent hum, it all rushed back. He checked his phone instinctively, forgetting it was dead. Only another hour had passed. He felt utterly drained, as if he had run a marathon through pure concept. But a peculiar clarity lingered, a vivid memory of the iridescent sea. He knew what she was fighting. He drifted again, deeper this time, pulled by an irresistible subconscious force. The hospital doors were no longer liquid light, but an enormous, intricate lock, its tumblers turning with the slow, agonizing clicks of time. He didn't need a key. He needed to understand the mechanism. He was no longer soaring, but standing on a single, crystalline thread stretched across a void. Below him, constellations formed from her memories pulsed and died. The light of her childhood bedroom, the fiery nebula of her first passion, the cold, distant gleam of a moment of profound heartbreak. The threads of connection, the bonds that tied her to the living world, were fraying, snapping one by one. The shadowy fissure from before wasn't a gaping wound now, but an intricate, rapidly growing web of crystalline darkness spreading across the constellations, encasing each memory, freezing it. This was the illness's true insidious nature. Not to destroy, but to isolate, to sever, to make her forget the very reasons for existence. He could see her, a small, luminous figure at the very center of the web, her light dimming with each snapped thread. He reached out. His touch, a mere thought in this plane, sparked a reaction. The web recoiled, but then lashed out, sending tendrils of icy silence that tried to bind him, to make him forget his own reasons for being there. He saw visions of a life without her, a colorless, soundless existence. The silence pressed, screaming at him to give up, to let go. But then, a memory, sharp and vibrant, cut through the encroaching stillness. Her laugh, echoing through a sun-drenched field. It wasn't just a memory. It was a physical sensation, a burst of warmth that shattered the icy tendrils. He knew then what to do. He began to sing, not with his voice, but with his soul, weaving the melodies of shared moments, the harmonies of their intertwined lives. He sang the songs they'd listened to, the jokes they'd shared, the quiet comfort of their unspoken understandings. Each note, each chord, resonated through the void, causing the crystalline darkness to crack. The music wasn't heard with ears. It was felt as a vibrant, living force. The constellations of memory, previously encased, began to flare, brighter than ever, fueled by the resurgence of connection. The snapping threads of her life began to respin, weaving themselves back into a shimmering, unbreakable rope of light. He saw her, at the center of the web, stir. Her small light pulsed, then surged, pushing against the remaining darkness. She began to resonate with his song, a faint, pure countermelody joining his. Together, their combined energy, a symphony of shared existence, caused the entire crystalline web to explode into a million twinkling motes of dust, dissipating into the void. The lock on the hospital doors clicked, a loud, final sound. Sukai bolted upright, his breath catching in his throat. The fluorescent light was still harsh, the bench still hard. But the air felt different, lighter, almost breathable. His body ached from sleeping in such an awkward position, but his spirit felt profoundly awake, energized. The double doors swung open. A doctor, looking far less harried than before, stepped out. "Mr. Su? She's stable. The crisis has passed. We still don't fully understand what happened, but she's going to be okay." Sukai pushed himself up, his legs stiff, a tremor running through him that had nothing to do with cold. He didn't need an explanation. He had been there. He had seen the fight, had sung his heart out on a thread of starlight, and helped pull her back from the brink. He nodded, a small, private smile touching his lips. He was just Sukai, waiting outside a hospital, but in the heart of the universe, he had just helped rewrite a constellation. The crisp, clinical scent of the hospital room was no longer a symbol of dread, but of a precarious victory. Sukai sat by her bedside, watching her sleep. The monitors sang their rhythmic, electronic song, a testament to her stable vital signs. To the doctors, her miraculous turnaround was a medical anomaly. To Sukai, it was a battle-scarred memory. He had journeyed through a sea of emotions and sung a melody of starlight to pull her back from the abyss. But he knew the fight was not truly over. The darkness, the metaphysical illness, was not gone. It was merely lurking, waiting for another moment of weakness. He felt it first as a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a cold stillness that medical equipment could not detect. He saw her face, serene in sleep, flicker with an almost imperceptible wince. He knew the illness had changed tactics. It was no longer a blunt force, but a cunning, insidious foe, now attacking her from within, where she was most vulnerable, in her subconscious. He closed his eyes, his hand resting on the back of hers, a physical anchor to the real world. He pushed past the physical plane, his spirit entering the fray. The hospital room vanished, replaced by an expansive, disorienting hall of mirrors. But these weren't ordinary mirrors. They were reflections of a self she didn't recognize, of a past she was too afraid to confront, of a future she was too weary to believe in. One mirror showed her a reflection of someone failing, their hands empty, their efforts meaningless. Another depicted her as a burden, her face pale with the weight of others' worries. Another still showed a reflection of profound, unchangeable loneliness, a life lived entirely on her own. The mirrors pulsed with a sickly gray light, whispering accusations and planting seeds of doubt. The illness was trying to convince her of her own worthlessness, hoping she would simply give up the will to live. Sukai knew he couldn't simply smash the mirrors. Their power came from her own inner fears. He had to replace the lies with truth. He focused his will, his own emotions, not on fighting, but on creating. He held onto a cherished memory of her laugh, a bright, melodic sound, and projected it onto the mirror of loneliness. The glass cracked, then shattered, replaced by an image of her surrounded by her loved ones, a vibrant, joyful smile on her face. He channeled a moment of her quiet strength, her unyielding determination, and focused it on the mirror of inadequacy. It too splintered, revealing her as a beacon of power and resolve. He was a one-man army of affirmation, a creator of reality, painting a portrait of her truest self onto a canvas of lies. The illness, infuriated by his interference, escalated its attack. The hall of mirrors crumbled, replaced by a vast, silent space dominated by a colossal, symbolic hourglass. The sand was not sand, but a shimmering, golden cascade of her most precious memories. A sunset viewed from a quiet beach, a shared meal with friends, a moment of triumph. But the hourglass was inverted, and the golden memories were draining rapidly, falling into a black abyss below, the precious sand turning to dust as it fell. The illness's whispers, now a cacophony, told her that all joy was fleeting, that time was running out, and that all her beautiful memories would be lost to the void, rendering her life meaningless. Sukai knew he couldn't stop the flow of time, but he could change the nature of what was flowing. He took a deep breath, or the metaphysical equivalent, and began to create with a new purpose. He focused on his own memories of her kindness, her courage, the comfort of her presence. He created new images, not just of her past, but of their potential future, a shared quiet moment, a new adventure, a life lived in harmony. He focused all his energy on the top bulb of the hourglass. He poured his own memories, his hopes, his quiet love for her into the flow. The gray, desolate sand was replaced by a fresh, vibrant, almost luminous flow of golden moments, memories infused with his energy and his love. The hourglass was still ticking, but now it was refilling her with hope, with a reason to live, with the promise of a future. This was the final straw. The illness's formless shadow coiled in the abyss below the hourglass, and it rose, a terrifying, silent presence that looked directly at Sukai. It did not speak with words, but with a torrent of thoughts that were not his own, telling him he was foolish, that his efforts were pointless, that all things decay and are lost to time. It was a final, devastating battle of wills. But Sukai didn't answer with a fight. He answered with a profound, quiet act of connection. He reached across the vast space, not physically, but with the full force of his spirit, and touched her. He found her consciousness, which had been flickering, pushed to its absolute limits, and he held it. He didn't just fight for her, he fought with her. Together, their combined consciousness, fortified by the new, hope-filled moments, projected a single, blindingly brilliant beam of light. It was a pure, unyielding force of life and love. The light struck the shadowy form of the illness, and with a silent, cataclysmic explosion, it disintegrated, its dust scattering into nothingness. The hourglass vanished. The darkness was gone. The world rushed back. Sukai was in the hospital room, his hand still on hers. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and this time there was no sign of pain or confusion. Her gaze was clear and bright. She looked at him, and her lips parted in a quiet smile. "You were there," she whispered, her voice weak but full of certainty. Sukai squeezed her hand, a profound sense of relief washing over him. He didn't need to ask how she knew or what she had seen. He had been there. He had walked through her despair and rebuilt her world with his own two hands. The battle was over, and in its wake, their bond, forged in the surreal, mind-bending crucible of a hospital room, was now stronger than he could have ever imagined.